The Misadventures of Flapjack!
What if the whimsical nautical adventures of your childhood were actually a bleak, psychological horror story hiding in plain sight? Welcome to Toon Theories. I am Detective Fox, and today we are tearing down the colorful facade of the marvelous misadventures of Flapjack. If you scroll through the internet late at night, you will find endless comment sections filled with young adults who share a collective, lingering trauma. They all remember the same unsettling feeling, the creeping dread that something was fundamentally wrong with this specific universe. It is time to validate those fears because your childhood instincts were entirely correct, and the truth is far darker than you ever imagined. This show was never a silly, light-hearted cartoon about an optimistic little boy and a goofy old pirate on the high seas. We have to look at this not through the nostalgic eyes of a child, but through the cold, calculating lens of a social investigator. When you do, the entire premise shifts from a quirky comedy into a cruel, unforgiving psychological test broadcast straight into your living room. There is absolutely no magic in Stormalong Harbor, and there are no swashbuckling adventures waiting over the horizon. The entire pirate journey you remember is nothing more than a child's frantic coping mechanism designed to keep his sanity intact. Flapjack is using his hyperactive imagination as a desperate mental shield to block out a filthy, decaying reality that surrounds him every day. His young, fragile mind simply cannot process the horrors of his environment, so he paints over the grime with pastel colors and catchy sea shanties. To understand why a child would need such a drastic psychological defense, we must carefully examine the twisted ecosystem of his home. Stormalong Harbor is not a quaint port town. It is a miniature, floating skid row entirely populated by the broken and the damned. The foundation of this society is built on a dark, devastating economy where candy is not a treat, but absolute poison. In this harbor, sugar operates as blood money and a highly addictive narcotic that dictates the very survival of its residents. The adults in this town do not eat sweets for pleasure, nor do they enjoy them casually like normal people in a functional society. They crave them with the shaking, sweating, bone-deep agony of severe addicts caught in the terrifying grip of relentless withdrawal. You can see them prowling the docks, willing to violently turn on each other, sell their dignity, or beat a man half to death for a single peppermint. This desperate environment creates the perfect feeding ground for predators, leading us directly to the terrifying reality of Dr. Barber. He is not a quirky, eccentric town doctor with a funny voice and a strange obsession with offering haircuts to sailors. Dr. Barber represents the absolute depravity of the black market medical trade, operating a filthy clinic right in the middle of a diseased slum. He does not want to heal his patients. He watches them with a predatory, unsettling hunger in his eyes that screams of malicious intent. He is constantly suggesting extreme, invasive, and entirely unnecessary surgical procedures for the absolute most minor of physical ailments. He is a back-alley butcher, an opportunistic organ harvester hiding behind a polite, eerie smile and a pair of razor-sharp scissors. When Dr. Barber looks at Flapjack, his gaze changes into something uniquely sinister and deeply alarming for any attentive viewer. He views the young boy not as a child, but as the only fresh, uncorrupted collection of harvestable parts in a sea of rotting flesh. Flapjack is the only pristine specimen left on the docks, making him a highly valuable target for a surgeon looking for clean tissue. But the medical horrors of this town pale in comparison to the absolute devastation caused by the harbor's heaviest narcotic. We have to talk about the maple syrup, the dark, viscous liquid that serves as the local equivalent of hard, illicit drugs or lethal bootleg liquor. When the desperate sailors finally manage to get their trembling hands on a barrel of this thick syrup, the animation takes a terrifying turn. They do not just experience a simple sugar rush. Their eyes completely glaze over into a hollow, milky white emptiness. Their bodies begin to contort in violent, unnatural spasms, stripping away all rational thought and completely erasing their basic humanity. They are reduced to feral, drooling creatures who have fully surrendered to the intoxicating, destructive power of the substance flowing through their veins. It is a brilliant, unvarnished depiction of severe chemical dependency, disguised just enough as physical comedy to bypass the network censors. Yet, the corruption of Stormalong extends far beyond desperate street addicts and back-alley surgeons operating in the shadows. The rot reaches into the very heights of organized crime, perfectly embodied by the proprietor of the candy barrel, Peppermint Larry. For years, audiences wrote Larry off as a sad, lonely romantic who built a fake wife out of sweets to cure his pathetic isolation. But Larry is not a tragic figure. He is a ruthless, high-level distributor running a massive, exploitative trafficking operation right out in the open. He is a predator who uses his wealth and narcotic supply to maintain total control over the addicts begging at his counter. The existence of Candy Wife is the most sickening, deeply veiled metaphor in the entire series, hiding in plain sight. Larry is essentially pimping out a sugar-coated illusion, manipulating the desperate patrons of his bar to fund his criminal enterprise. In multiple highly disturbing episodes, we watch him casually break off pieces of his so-called wife to sell to his customers or consume himself. This is a horrifying allegory for exploiting and selling bodies, chopping up human dignity to keep the local population permanently hooked on his supply. Larry maintains his twisted empire by trading away the literal flesh of the thing he claims to love more than anything else. To keep these broken souls from giving up entirely, dealers like Larry peddle the ultimate, impossible myth known to everyone as Candied Island. It sounds like a magical paradise, a beautiful destination where all their pain will wash away in a sparkling ocean of lemonade. But Candied Island does not exist, and it never has. It is the physical embodiment of a junkie chasing the dragon. It is the mythical, impossible high that addicts spend their entire lives pursuing after their very first hit, a euphoria they can never recapture. The maps leading to this island are nothing but meaningless scraps of trash covered in frantic, scribbled nonsense that lead nowhere. Despite the maps being literal garbage, the residents of the harbor clutch them tightly against their chests like sacred religious texts. Captain Knuckles relies on this delusion because the illusion of a sugary paradise is the only lie keeping him breathing through the misery. Without the fake promise of Candied Island, he would be forced to face the hollow, rotting reality of his wasted existence on the docks. This desperate need for a coping mechanism brings us to the absolute center of this tragic, narcotic-fueled nightmare that drives the plot. We must examine the deeply disturbing, intensely toxic dynamic between the innocent Flapjack and his absolute idol, Captain Knuckles. Their relationship is fundamentally broken, serving as a flawless, textbook cycle of domestic abuse and relentless psychological manipulation. It always begins with the tension phase, which is triggered the exact moment Knuckles runs out of his candy supply and goes into severe withdrawal. The old pirate begins to shake, he sweats profusely, and he violently lashes out at everything around him, creating an atmosphere of pure terror for the boy. Flapjack reacts exactly like a traumatized victim, shrinking down, trembling, and desperately trying to soothe the angry addict while taking the blame for the outbursts. This agonizing tension quickly and inevitably escalates into the dangerous incident phase of the classic abuse cycle. Driven by an unyielding, blinding need for his next fix, Knuckles completely disregards the safety of the child who blindly worships him. The pirate forces the boy into committing petty theft, manipulates him into dangerous schemes, and routinely abandons him in mortal peril. Knuckles will gladly leave Flapjack to face terrifying consequences just to save his own skin and secure a few measly peppermints from a vendor. The child is subjected to immense physical and emotional trauma, left completely alone to navigate the terrifying underworld of the criminal docks. But the psychological trap is incredibly effective, and it always snaps shut during the sinister honeymoon phase of their relationship. Once the danger has passed and Knuckles has his candy, he returns to the boy with a sickening display of fake remorse. He cries crocodile tears and spins elaborate, delusional tales of his fictional pirate glory, effectively brainwashing the desperate child all over again. He dangles the glittering promise of Candied Island right in front of Flapjack, using the boy's desperate need for a father figure against him as a weapon. Flapjack falls for the manipulation every single time, instantly forgiving his abuser, maintaining his blind loyalty and remaining firmly trapped in the cycle. Knuckles uses these extreme delusions of grandeur to mentally chain the boy to his side, ensuring he always has a willing, naive pawn. You have to wonder why Bubby, a massive whale who serves as the boy's surrogate mother, allows this horrifying cycle to continue. Bubby genuinely loves Flapjack and her maternal instincts are very real, but her form of love is a suffocating, deeply toxic trap. She serves as the ultimate enabler in this horrific dynamic, refusing to do the one thing that could actually save the child from his environment. Instead of swimming far away and taking Flapjack thousands of miles from the disease and corruption of Stormalong, she stays perfectly anchored in the filth. She cannot let go of her own attachment to the harbor, so she forces the boy to remain in a highly dangerous, abusive situation. Bubby constantly hovers nearby, always ready to clean up the horrific messes and catastrophic failures that Knuckles leaves behind in his wake. She scolds the pirate, she complains about his terrible influence, but she never permanently locks him out of her mouth or cuts him off. By normalizing the chaos and constantly smoothing over the trauma, she becomes an active, destructive participant in the toxic cycle that ruins the boy. She thinks she is protecting Flapjack, but in reality she is tethering him to his abuser and ensuring he can never truly escape his fate. Her enabling behavior seals the boy's doom, forcing him to coexist with a manipulative addict day after miserable day. The most heartbreaking part of this inescapable trap is that the vile environment is finally taking a permanent toll on the innocent boy. If you pay close attention to the later seasons, you will notice that Flapjack is absolutely not immune to the poison surrounding him. His pure, incorruptible spirit slowly begins to rot away as he learns how to survive in a town entirely populated by desperate predators. He starts lying to get his way, manipulating other residents with the exact same deceptive, underhanded tactics he learned directly from his abuser. His signature wide-eyed smile becomes forced, twisted, and entirely hollow, replacing genuine joy with something deeply uncanny and mentally unsettling. Flapjack begins to adopt the erratic, manic behaviors of his mentor, throwing bizarre tantrums and acting with a sudden, ruthless selfishness that defies his original character. He is not just looking up to Knuckles anymore, he is effectively morphing into a miniature, equally broken version of the pirate who ruined his life. Knuckles is not just a companion on a wacky adventure, but a dark, terrifying mirror reflecting Flapjack's inevitable, decaying future. The harsh reality of his abusive environment has finally infected his mind, breaking his spirit and entirely reshaping his fundamental personality. He is perfectly groomed to become the next generation's washed-up, desperate addict, forever trapped on a rotting wooden dock with nowhere to go. The true horror of this cartoon was never the sudden, hyper-detailed claymation close-ups that used to jump scare you through the television screen. Those bizarre artistic choices were just a clever distraction, a visual red herring designed to hide the much deeper, psychological terror lurking underneath the surface. The greatest fear is the agonizing experience of watching a bright, young mind get systematically broken, bent, and corrupted by the very adults he trusted most. It is witnessing the slow death of innocence, knowing that no heroes are coming over the horizon to save this little boy from the darkness. There is no rescue coming for Flapjack, and his tragic fate was sealed the very moment he first set foot in Stormalong Harbor. Your childhood memories just cracked a little more, didn't they? The comforting illusions we build are always the first things to shatter when you finally dare to look closely at the shadows hiding just out of frame. Welcome to the dark side of your nostalgia, where nothing is safe and every happy ending is just a well-crafted, desperate lie. If you want us to dissect other crazy theories in the animated world, leave a comment below.